I'm standing in the marble-floored lobby of Hartwell and Associates law firm, clutching the certified letter that changed everything. My grandfather Walter, who raised me from age 8 after my parents abandoned me for their drug-fueled lifestyle, has died and left me $5 million. The same parents who called me worthless, who chose addiction over their son, who haven't contacted me in 12 years, are now demanding half the inheritance through a lawsuit. As I enter the courtroom, my stomach churns with a mixture of grief, anger, and disbelief at their audacity. My name is Blaze, and I need to tell you about the day my world shattered. I was 8 years old, sitting on the threadbare carpet of our cramped apartment in Toledo, Ohio, playing with my toy cars, when I heard the argument escalating in the kitchen. My father Derek was yelling at my mother Sandra about needing to pack faster. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with the acrid scent of whatever pills Mom had been taking that morning. Derek appeared in the doorway, his sandy hair unwashed and his blue eyes bloodshot. He was stuffing clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. "We're moving to California, kid," he said without looking at me. Fresh start, new opportunities. I scrambled to my feet, excitement bubbling in my chest. "When do we leave? Can I bring my cars?" Sandra emerged from the kitchen, her once pretty face gaunt and hollow. She'd been my beautiful mom who used to read me bedtime stories, but now she moved like a ghost through our home. "You're not coming with us, sweetie," she said, her voice distant and mechanical. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" Derek zipped up his bag and finally met my eyes. "You'll slow us down, Blaze. We need to travel light, move fast. Your grandfather Walter will take care of you." I started crying, then big, ugly sobs that made my whole body shake. "But I don't want to stay with Grandpa Walter. I want to come with you." Sandra knelt down and touched my face with cold fingers. "You're a smart boy. Too smart for your own good sometimes. Walter can give you things we can't." Her pupils were tiny pinpricks, and I could smell something chemical on her breath. That afternoon, Walter's old blue pickup truck rumbled into our driveway. He was 62 years old then, with silver hair and hands that looked like weathered leather from decades of construction work. When he walked into our apartment, his steel gray eyes took in the empty beer bottles, the overflowing ashtrays, the general chaos of our lives. "You ready, buddy?" he asked me, his voice gentle but firm. Derek and Sandra were already in their car engine running. They didn't get out to hug me goodbye. They didn't wave as they drove away. They just left like I was a piece of furniture they couldn't fit in their new life. Walter helped me pack my few belongings into a cardboard box, some clothes, my toy cars, a photo of our family from better times. As we walked to his truck, I looked back at the apartment one last time. The windows were dark, and I could already feel how empty it was without us. The 3-hour drive to Walter's house in rural Michigan was mostly silent. I pressed my face against the passenger window, watching the flat farmland roll by, feeling like I was traveling to another planet. Walter finally spoke when we pulled into his driveway. "Your parents are sick, Blaze," he said quietly. "They love you, but they're sick in their heads and their hearts. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You understand?" I nodded, though I didn't really understand anything anymore. That first night in Walter's house, I lay in the small bedroom he'd prepared for me, surrounded by unfamiliar sounds. The old house creaked and settled around me. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train whistled its lonely song. I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I'd done wrong to make my parents leave me behind. But Walter was there the next morning with pancakes and orange juice. He was there when I woke up from nightmares. He was there when I got sick with the flu. He was there for every school play, every baseball game, every moment that mattered. Slowly, painfully, I began to understand that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest, and sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. The twisted irony is that Derek and Sandra thought they were dumping me on Walter because they saw me as a burden. They had no idea they were giving me the greatest gift of my life, a real father. Walter's house became my sanctuary. Every morning at 5:30 sharp, he'd wake me with the smell of strong black coffee and the sizzle of scrambled eggs in his cast-iron skillet. We'd sit at his kitchen table, a sturdy oak piece he'd built himself, and he'd tell me about his day ahead while I ate breakfast. "Today, we're going to learn about measuring twice and cutting once," he'd say. Or, "Time to understand why foundation matters more than everything else." These weren't just carpentry lessons. They were life lessons wrapped in sawdust and honest work. His garage workshop became my second home. The walls were lined with tools that had been used and maintained for decades. Each hammer, saw, and level had a story. Walter would show me how to hold a chisel properly, how to feel the grain of wood before making a cut, how to build something that would last. His hands guided mine as I learned to create, instead of just consume. School became easier once I settled into Walter's routine. My teachers noticed the change immediately. I went from being a distracted, angry kid to someone who raised his hand in class and turned in homework on time. Walter checked my grades every week, not to criticize, but to celebrate progress. When I brought home my first straight A report card in 5th grade, he took me to Dairy Queen and told me he was proud of me. I'd never heard those words before. High school brought new challenges, but Walter was my constant anchor. He attended every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, every academic award ceremony. Other kids would complain about their parents embarrassing them, but I was proud to have Walter there in his clean flannel shirt and polished work boots, beaming whenever my name was called. When I became valedictorian of my graduating class, Walter cried during my speech. I'd written about second chances and the people who believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. As I looked out at the audience, I saw him wiping his eyes with his handkerchief, and I knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. College was the next mountain to climb. Walter had saved money for years, but my academic record earned me a full scholarship to State University for mechanical engineering. He drove me to campus in his truck, now showing its age, but still reliable. As he helped me move into my dormitory room, he gave me advice that still guides me today. "Remember, Blaze, education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. Your parents took themselves away, but they couldn't take your mind, your heart, or your future. Make the most of this opportunity." I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity Walter had brought to every project in his workshop. Engineering came naturally to me, maybe because Walter had already taught me how to solve problems systematically and build things that worked. I graduated summa cum laude and landed a job with a renewable energy company in Grand Rapids. That's where I met Emma. She was a project coordinator with bright green eyes and a laugh that could light up entire rooms. We met during a wind farm installation project, and I was immediately struck by how she approached every challenge with optimism and intelligence. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant, where we talked for 4 hours about everything from sustainable technology to childhood dreams. Walter loved Emma from the moment he met her. She'd bring him homemade cookies and listen to his stories about the old days in construction. When I proposed to her on the shore of Lake Michigan, Walter was the first person I called. His voice cracked with emotion as he congratulated us and welcomed her to our little family. By age 28, I owned a house in a quiet neighborhood, had a successful career designing solar panel systems, and was planning a wedding with the woman of my dreams. Walter would visit every Sunday for dinner, and we'd work on home improvement projects together. He taught me that a man takes care of his space and the people in it. But something had been bothering Walter during those last few months. He seemed more tired than usual, and sometimes I'd catch him staring off into the distance with a worried expression. When I asked about it, he'd just smile and change the subject. I wish I'd pushed harder to understand what was troubling him. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Walter had collapsed in his workshop and was rushed to the hospital. By the time Emma and I arrived, the doctors told us there was nothing they could do. His heart had simply given out after decades of hard work and harder living. I held his hand as he passed away, and his last words to me were, "I'm proud of the man you became, son." Take care of yourself and Emma. Build a good life." 3 days later, Walter's lawyer called me to discuss his will. That's when I learned about the $5 million. Walter's funeral filled the entire sanctuary of First Presbyterian Church. Construction workers who'd known him for 40 years sat next to neighbors he'd helped with countless home repairs. Emma and I had chosen a simple oak casket that Walter would have appreciated, something solid and honest without unnecessary frills. I delivered his eulogy wearing the tie he'd bought me for college graduation. Standing at the podium, looking out at all these faces of people whose lives Walter had touched, I felt both overwhelming sadness and deep gratitude. Walter Thompson wasn't my biological grandfather. I began my voice steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. He was something better. He was the man who chose to love me when my own parents couldn't. He taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about showing up. And Walter showed up every single day for 20 years. I told them about the morning pancakes, the workshop lessons, the quiet moments when he'd listen to my problems without judgment. I described how he'd transformed a broken 8-year-old into someone capable of love and success. The congregation was silent, except for the occasional sniffle or throat clearing. Walter lived his values instead of just talking about them. He believed in hard work, honest dealing, and taking care of the people around you. He never met a problem he wouldn't try to solve, or a person he wouldn't help if he could. The world is dimmer without his light, but brighter because he was in it. After the service, people filed past the casket to pay their respects. That's when I noticed two strangers standing awkwardly near the back of the church. The man was maybe 50 years old, thin and nervous-looking, wearing an ill-fitting black suit that looked like it came from a discount store. His brown hair was streaked with premature gray, and his hands shook slightly as he fumbled with a worn baseball cap. The woman beside him had to be around the same age, though she looked older. Heavy makeup couldn't hide the deep lines around her eyes or the yellowish tint to her skin. Her black dress was too tight, and she kept fidgeting with a cheap purse. They approached me as the receiving line dwindled. The man cleared his throat nervously. "Blaze, I'm Derek. This is Sandra. We're your parents." The words hit me like ice water. 20 years had changed them dramatically. Derek's once handsome face was gaunt and weathered, his blue eyes now watery and unfocused. Sandra's beauty had been eroded by years of substance abuse, leaving behind a hollow shell of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask Emma's hand, finding mine for support. Sandra stepped forward, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace. "We came to pay our respects to Walter. And to see you, of course. Our successful son." The way she said successful made my skin crawl. There was something calculating in her tone, something that reminded me of a snake sizing up its prey. "We've been following your career." Derek added, his voice raspy from years of smoking. "We're so proud of what you've accomplished. We always knew you were special." The audacity of their words made my blood boil. They'd abandoned me, ignored me for 20 years, and now they wanted to claim credit for my achievements. I was about to respond when Sandra's voice cut through the tension. "We need to talk, sweetie. There are some things about Walter's will that we need to discuss." Emma squeezed my hand tighter. "This isn't the time or place," she said firmly. Sandra's fake smile faltered. "Actually, it's the perfect time. We've hired a lawyer, and we have some concerns about how Walter's estate is being handled." Before I could process what was happening, Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. "You've been served, Blaze. We're contesting the will. Walter had no right to leave everything to you when we're his only surviving family members." The church basement fell silent. Elderly mourners who'd been sharing memories of Walter stopped their conversations and stared. Emma gasped beside me. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. Derek shuffled his feet nervously. "We don't want to hurt you, son. We just want what's fair. We're family, after all." Family. The word exploded out of me, louder than I intended. You walked out on me 20 years ago. You chose drugs over your child. You never called, never wrote, never cared if I was alive or dead. Sandra's mask slipped completely. That's not true. Walter poisoned you against us. He stole you from us, and now he's trying to steal your inheritance too. Several of Walter's friends stepped closer, their faces dark with anger. Emma pulled me toward the exit, sensing the situation was about to escalate beyond control. As we walked away, I heard Sandra's voice rising behind us. This isn't over, Blaze. We know our rights. We'll see you in court. The sanctuary that had been filled with love and remembrance just an hour earlier now felt contaminated by their presence. As Emma and I drove home in stunned silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that Walter's death had just become the beginning of something much darker. That night, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. The legal documents were thick and intimidating, filled with language I didn't understand. But one thing was crystal clear. Derek and Sandra were demanding half of Walter's $5 million estate, claiming parental rights, and alleging that Walter had illegally interfered with their relationship with their son. 20 years of silence, and this was why they'd finally come back. Not for me. For the money. The law offices of Caruso Martinez and Associates occupied the third floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place that screamed aggressive litigation from every chrome surface. Vincent Caruso himself appeared at my workplace 2 weeks after the funeral, his shiny gray suit and slicked back hair making him look like a character from a mob movie. Blaze Thompson. He approached my desk in the engineering department holding a leather briefcase and wearing a smile that never reached his eyes. I represent Derek and Sandra Morrison. I have some documents for you. My coworkers stopped their conversations and stared as Caruso set his briefcase on my desk with a dramatic flourish. He was clearly enjoying the theater of the moment. You're being sued for unlawful inheritance and parental alienation, he announced loud enough for the entire office to hear. My clients are seeking 50% of Walter Thompson's estate, plus damages for emotional distress and lost relationship with their son. I took the papers with hands that weren't quite steady. The lawsuit was even thicker than the first set of documents filled with accusations that made my head spin. According to Caruso's filing, Derek and Sandra had been devoted parents who'd been forced to leave Ohio due to economic circumstances beyond their control. They claimed Walter had kidnapped me and spent 20 years systematically poisoning me against them. This is ridiculous, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet office. They abandoned me. They chose drugs over their child. Caruso's smile widened. That's not what the evidence shows, Mr. Thompson. My clients have been searching for you for years. They've been in therapy, dealing with the trauma of losing their beloved son. They have medical records documenting their emotional distress. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. Hospital records, therapy session notes, prescription records for antidepressants and anxiety medications, all documenting the devastating impact of Walter Thompson's interference with their parental rights. The papers looked official enough, complete with medical letterheads and doctor signatures. But something about them felt wrong. The dates seemed too convenient, the language too clinical, like they'd been written by lawyers instead of medical professionals. We're prepared to be reasonable. Caruso continued adjusting his gold watch. A settlement of $2.5 million would resolve this matter quickly and quietly. Think of it as back child support for all those years Walter kept you away from your loving parents. My supervisor, Janet, approached cautiously. Is there a problem here, Blaze? No problem at all, Caruso said smoothly. Just serving legal documents. Although I should mention that if this goes to trial, it'll be quite public. Local media loves a good family drama, especially when there's this much money involved. The threat was clear: settle or face public humiliation. I thought about Emma, about our upcoming wedding, about the quiet life we'd built together. The idea of our private business splashed across newspaper headlines made my stomach turn. I need time to think about this, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But remember, legal fees accumulate quickly. Sometimes the cost of fighting exceeds the cost of settling. Caruso snapped his briefcase shut and handed me a business card. Have your lawyer call me when you're ready to be reasonable. That evening, Emma and I sat in our kitchen, the lawsuit papers spread across our dining table like pieces of a nightmare puzzle. She'd been quiet since I'd called to tell her what happened, and I could see the worry lines forming around her eyes. Maybe we should just settle, she said finally. $2.5 million is still a lot of money. We could pay them off and be done with this mess. It's not about the money, I replied, though part of me wondered if that was entirely true. It's about what's right. They don't deserve anything from Walter's estate. They forfeited any claim to being my parents 20 years ago. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. I understand why you're angry. But think about what we're up against. These people have nothing to lose and everything to gain. They'll drag this out for years if they have to. Do you really want to spend our first years of marriage fighting in courtrooms? Her words made sense, but something deep in my gut rebelled against the idea of rewarding Derek and Sandra's opportunism. Walter had worked his entire life to build that nest egg. He'd saved every penny, lived modestly, and planned carefully so he could leave me something meaningful. The thought of handing half of it over to the people who'd abandoned me felt like betraying everything he'd stood for. I hired Rebecca Chen from Morrison Davis and Associates the next day. She was the estate planning attorney with 15 years of experience and a reputation for thorough preparation. Her office was the opposite of Caruso's showplace, comfortable, understated with law books lining every wall. I've reviewed the documents, she said during our first meeting, and there are several red flags. These medical records appear to have been created specifically for this lawsuit. The therapy notes are too generic, and some of the dates don't align with public records. What do you mean? For example, they claim to have been in marriage counseling in Las Vegas in 2010, trying to rebuild their family so they could bring their son home. But public records show they were arrested for drug possession in Phoenix that same month. Hope flickered in my chest. So we can fight this? We can fight it. But I need to warn you, family lawsuits are ugly affairs. They'll dig up every detail of your childhood, every interaction with Walter, every decision he made regarding your upbringing. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I thought about Walter's workshop, about Sunday dinners, about the quiet moments when he'd helped me with homework, or listened to my teenage problems. Every memory was clean and honest. I had nothing to hide. I'm prepared. Rebecca nodded approvingly. Good. Because we're going to need to prove not just that Walter was a good guardian, but that your biological parents were unfit. That means investigating their activities over the past 20 years, documenting their addiction issues, and potentially exposing some very ugly truths about their lifestyle choices. As I left Rebecca's office that afternoon, I felt like I was stepping into a war I'd never wanted to fight. But Walter had taught me that some things were worth defending even when the cost was high. His love, his sacrifice, and his legacy deserved better than being divided up between two people who'd only returned for the money. The real battle was just beginning. The Calhoun County Courthouse buzzed with unusual activity on the morning of March 15th. Word had spread about the inheritance dispute, and local reporters clustered around the front steps, like vultures waiting for carrion. As Emma and I walked up the stone steps, camera flashes erupted around us. Blaze. Any comment on your parents' lawsuit? Shouted a reporter from the Grand Rapids Herald. Are you willing to share your grandfather's fortune? Called another. Rebecca guided us through the crowd with practiced efficiency, her briefcase in one hand and her other arm creating a protective barrier. No comments until after the proceedings, she told the media pack firmly. Inside the courtroom was packed. I'd expected a quiet legal proceeding, but this felt more like a circus. Curious locals filled the gallery, along with reporters scribbling notes and sketch artists capturing every detail. At the plaintiff's table, Derek sat hunched over in an ill-fitting suit, his hands visibly shaking. Sandra wore a conservative black dress that looked borrowed, her hair pulled back severely, and her makeup applied with unusual restraint. Vincent Caruso commanded attention in an expensive charcoal suit, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He moved around the courtroom like he owned it, gesturing dramatically, and speaking in a voice clearly intended for the gallery. Judge Patricia Harrison entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She was a stern-looking woman in her 50s, with graying brown hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Her reputation for no-nonsense proceedings preceded her, and the courtroom fell silent as she took her seat. This is the matter of Morrison versus Thompson, regarding the estate of Walter Thompson, she announced. Mr. Caruso, you may present your opening argument. Caruso rose with theatrical flair. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of parental alienation and stolen inheritance. My clients Derek and Sandra Morrison were young parents facing economic hardship 20 years ago. They made the difficult decision to temporarily place their son with his grandfather while they relocated to California to establish better employment opportunities. He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. Walter Thompson, instead of facilitating reunion between parents and child, chose to poison this innocent boy against his loving family. For 20 years, he systematically destroyed the bond between Blaze Morrison and his biological parents, while secretly accumulating a $5 million estate that rightfully belongs to Derek and Sandra as Walter's only surviving heirs through their son. I wanted to stand up and shout that every word was a lie, but Rebecca had coached me to remain silent during opening statements. Instead, I watched in disbelief as Caruso painted a picture of Derek and Sandra as victims of circumstance rather than negligent addicts. The evidence will show that my clients never stopped loving their son, never stopped trying to reconnect with him, and never stopped suffering from the loss of their family relationship. They deserve justice, and they deserve their fair share of an estate that should never have bypassed them in the first place. Rebecca's opening was crisp and factual. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Derek and Sandra Morrison voluntarily abandoned their 8-year-old son in 2003, choosing drug addiction over parental responsibility. Walter Thompson didn't steal a child. He rescued one. He provided 20 years of love support and guidance that transformed an abandoned boy into a successful young man. Walter's will was his final act of love for the grandson he raised, and it should be honored according to his clearly expressed wishes. The first witness was Derek himself. As he walked to the witness stand, I could see the tremor in his hands and the nervous sweat on his forehead. Caruso had clearly coached him extensively, but Derek's natural fidgeting and darting eyes made him look guilty of something. Mr. Morrison, please tell the court about your relationship with your son, Caruso began. Derek's voice was barely audible. Blaze was our everything. Sandra and I loved that boy more than life itself. We were young, struggling financially, but we were devoted parents. What happened in 2003? We lost our jobs in Toledo. The economy was terrible, and we couldn't find work. We had an opportunity to relocate to California, but we couldn't afford to bring Blaze immediately. We asked Walter to care for him temporarily while we got established. Derek's story sounded rehearsed, like he was reciting lines from a script. We sent letters, tried to call, but Walter always made excuses. He told Blaze we didn't want him anymore. He poisoned our son against us. How did this make you feel? Derek's voice cracked with what seemed like genuine emotion. It destroyed us. We've been in therapy for years dealing with the depression and anxiety. We never stopped loving Blaze. We never stopped wanting him back. Rebecca's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Morrison, you stated you moved to California for employment opportunities. What was your job there? Derek shifted uncomfortably. We had various positions. The employment market was challenging. Public records show you were arrested for methamphetamine possession in Los Angeles in October 2003, just 6 months after leaving Ohio. Is that correct? That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that resulted in a 6-month jail sentence. Derek's composure was cracking. I was going through a difficult time. The separation from my son was causing emotional problems. Mr. Morrison, in the past 20 years, how many times have you been arrested for drug-related offenses? Caruso objected, but Judge Harrison allowed the question. Derek mumbled something inaudible. Please speak clearly for the record. 7 times. And Ms. Morrison? 9 times. Rebecca continued methodically documenting their criminal history, their multiple addresses, their failure to maintain steady employment. By the time Derek left the witness stand, his carefully constructed image as a loving father had been thoroughly dismantled. Sandra's testimony followed a similar pattern. She'd clearly been coached to present herself as a grieving mother, but her nervous energy and defensive answers undermined her credibility. When Rebecca asked about specific dates when she claimed to have tried contacting me, Sandra's timeline fell apart completely. You testified that you sent birthday cards to your son every year. Where did you send these cards? To Walter's address. But you also testified that you didn't know Walter's address because he kept it secret from you. Which statement is accurate? Sandra's face flushed. We found out the address later. When specifically? I don't remember exactly. Rebecca produced a stack of returned mail from Walter's house. Your Honor, these are letters that Blaze wrote to his parents over several years, all returned marked addressee unknown, because Derek and Sandra Morrison had moved without leaving forwarding addresses. They make no mention of any incoming mail from the parents to the child. The courtroom gallery murmured at this revelation. I'd never seen those letters before, and the sight of my 8-year-old handwriting asking, "When are you coming back?" made my eyes burn with unshed tears. When it was my turn to testify, I felt the weight of everyone's attention. The gallery was silent as I was sworn in and took my seat. Rebecca's questions allowed me to tell my story chronologically, from the day my parents left through my graduation from college and career success. Did Walter Thompson ever prevent you from contacting your biological parents? No. For the first few years, I wrote them letters regularly. Walter helped me address the envelopes and walked with me to the mailbox. Every letter came back marked undeliverable. How did that make you feel? Confused at first, then hurt, then angry. Eventually, I stopped trying because it was clear they didn't want to be found. Did Walter Thompson provide a stable home environment? More than stable. He gave me structure, love, and encouragement. He attended every school event, helped with homework, taught me valuable life skills. He was the father I needed during the most crucial years of my development. Caruso's cross-examination was aggressive and personal. Mr. Thompson, isn't it true that Walter poisoned you against your parents by telling you lies about their character? Walter never spoke badly about my parents. When I asked questions about why they left, he always said they were sick and that it wasn't my fault. Sick how? He said they had problems they needed to solve before they could be good parents. But you harbor resentment toward Derek and Sandra Morrison, don't you? I considered the question carefully. I harbor resentment toward people who abandoned their child and then returned 20 years later demanding money. If those people happen to be my biological parents, then yes. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of pencils on paper. Judge Harrison was watching me intently, and something in her expression seemed to shift. She leaned forward slightly, studying my face with what looked like recognition. Then she did something completely unexpected. She stopped the proceedings mid-question and stared at me with wide eyes. "Wait," she said slowly, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You're his grandson." The entire courtroom went still. Caruso froze mid-gesture. Rebecca looked confused. Derek and Sandra exchanged bewildered glances. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," I replied, completely lost. Judge Harrison's face had gone completely white. She gripped her gavel with both hands and seemed to be struggling with some internal conflict. "I need an immediate recess," she announced abruptly. "All parties will remain in the building. Court will reconvene in 30 minutes." She left the bench quickly, her black robes billowing behind her. The courtroom erupted in confused chatter, as everyone tried to understand what had just happened. Emma grabbed my arm. "What was that about?" Rebecca looked as puzzled as everyone else. "I have no idea. I've never seen anything like that before." As we waited in the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed in our case. Judge Harrison's reaction to learning my identity suggested a connection I couldn't understand. Whatever secret she was keeping, it was about to turn everything upside down. The 30-minute recess stretched into an hour as court officials huddled in whispered conversations. Finally, a bailiff emerged from Judge Harrison's chambers and called both legal teams for a private conference. Rebecca gathered her files and disappeared behind the heavy wooden doors, leaving Emma and me alone in the hallway with our mounting confusion. When the lawyers emerged 20 minutes later, Rebecca's face was pale. She sat down beside me and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Blaze, Judge Harrison has disclosed something that changes everything. She's Walter Thompson's daughter from his first marriage. That makes her your aunt." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "She's been estranged from Walter for over 20 years due to a family dispute. She had no idea Walter had been caring for Derek's son until this moment. She's recusing herself from the case. But first, she wants to share something with both parties." My mind reeled as we filed back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison returned to the bench, but her judicial composure had been replaced by visible, emotional turmoil. Her hands shook slightly as she addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must inform the court that I have a personal connection to this case that requires my immediate recusal. However, before I step down, I have information that both parties need to hear." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an envelope that looked worn from handling. 24 hours ago, I received a letter that was delivered to my home. It was from Walter Thompson, written before his death, and instructed to be delivered only if this lawsuit came to trial. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling. Judge Harrison's voice cracked as she continued. "Walter Thompson was my father. Due to a bitter disagreement following my mother's death 20 years ago, we became estranged. I was too proud and too angry to reconcile. I never knew he'd been raising his grandson." She opened the envelope with trembling fingers and began to read. "Patricia, if you're reading this, it means my fears about Derek and Sandra have come true. I've been fighting cancer for 2 years, and I've used that time to prepare for what might happen after I'm gone. I hired a private investigator to locate and monitor Derek and Sandra Morrison. What I discovered will break your heart." Judge Harrison paused, composing herself before continuing. "They've been living in Nevada for the past 3 years, running a drug distribution operation out of a storage facility. They've been tracking Blaze's success through social media, waiting for me to die so they could make their move. The investigator has recordings of them planning this lawsuit discussing how much money they could extract from my estate." The courtroom erupted. Derek jumped to his feet, his face flushed with panic. "That's not true. We never said any of that." Sandra was crying, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her cheeks. "It's all lies. We just want our son back." Judge Harrison raised her hand for silence. The letter continues. "Patricia, I know I hurt you deeply when I sided with your stepmother after Mom's death. I know you felt betrayed and abandoned. I've written you letters every year on your birthday, but I never had the courage to send them. I kept them all along with newspaper clippings about your legal career. I was so proud of you, even though I had no right to be." She was crying now, her professional demeanor completely gone. "If this lawsuit happens, please know that Blaze is the finest young man I've ever known. He's honest, hardworking, and kind. He deserves every penny I'm leaving him, not because he's my grandson, but because he earned it through 20 years of being a good son to an old man who needed someone to care about." The letter went on to detail Walter's cancer diagnosis, his attempts to reconnect with his estranged family members, and his decision to leave evidence that would protect me from Derek and Sandra's scheme. He'd known they would come eventually. The private investigator's files are in my safety deposit box at First National Bank. The key is taped under the workbench in my garage. Patricia, I hope someday you can forgive a stubborn old man who loved his family more than he knew how to show. Judge Harrison folded the letter carefully and looked up at the courtroom. Mr. Caruso, Mr. and Ms. Morrison, in light of this information and my conflict of interest, I'm recusing myself immediately. Judge Michael Roberts will be assigned to this case tomorrow morning. However, I'm also ordering the immediate investigation of the evidence Walter Thompson described in his letter. As court officers moved to secure the private investigator's files, Derek and Sandra's facade finally crumbled completely. Derek tried to leave the courtroom, but was stopped by a bailiff. Sandra collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Caruso was frantically shuffling papers, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage his case. Your Honor, even if these allegations are true, it doesn't change the fact that my clients are entitled to inheritance as the biological parents. Mr. Caruso. Judge Harrison interrupted her voice, now carrying the full authority of her position, despite her personal involvement. Based on what I've just read, your clients may be facing criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. I suggest you consider your options very carefully. As the courtroom emptied, I sat in stunned silence. Emma held my hand tightly, while Rebecca gathered our materials. The revelation about Judge Harrison being my aunt was almost as shocking as learning about Walter's cancer and his investigation into Derek and Sandra. Judge Harrison approached our table as the crowd dispersed. Up close, I could see the family resemblance. The same steel-gray eyes, Walter had the same determined jawline. Blaze, I know this is overwhelming. Could we talk privately for a few minutes? We found a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. She'd removed her judicial robes and looked smaller, somehow more vulnerable. I owe you an apology, she began. Walter tried to reach out to me many times over the years, and I was too stubborn to respond. I let my anger over ancient history blind me to what was really important. You didn't know about me. I knew Derek had a son, but after Walter and I stopped speaking, I lost track of family details. If I'd known what you'd been through, what Walter was doing for you. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. He was a good man. I forgot that in my hurt and anger. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo. This is Walter and me at my law school graduation. He was so proud, even though he didn't understand why anyone would choose law over construction. In the photo, a younger Walter beamed beside a woman in graduation robes. The love between father and daughter was obvious, making their 20-year estrangement even more tragic. I have a box of letters he wrote me over the years, she continued. I never opened them, but I never threw them away either. Maybe we could read them together sometime. I'd like that. She smiled through her tears. Walter was right about you. You have his kindness in your eyes. I'm sorry it took a lawsuit for us to meet, but I'm grateful we finally have. As Emma and I walked out of the courthouse that afternoon, the media circus had died down. The reporters had gotten wind of the developing criminal investigation and were already chasing that story instead. I felt emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. The truth about Derek and Sandra was painful, but not surprising. What moved me was learning that Walter had spent his final years thinking about family, trying to heal old wounds, and protect the people he loved. That evening, Emma and I drove to Walter's house to retrieve the safety deposit box key. The garage workshop looked exactly as he'd left it, tools arranged precisely, and projects half finished on the workbench. I found the key, taped exactly where his letter said it would be. As I knelt under that workbench, running my fingers over the smooth wood Walter had shaped with his own hands, I felt his presence in the room. He'd known this day would come. He'd prepared for it with the same methodical care he brought to every project. The key felt warm in my palm like a final gift from the man who'd given me everything that mattered. The private investigator's files painted a devastating picture of Derek and Sandra's activities over the past 3 years. Agent Rodriguez from the DEA met with the new judge the following morning to present evidence of their drug distribution network, their surveillance of my social media accounts, and most damning of all, recorded conversations where they discussed the inheritance lawsuit in detail. "The old man's got to be worth something." Derek's voice crackled through the courtroom speakers. Blaze posted pictures of some fancy engineering job. Kids living good because of Walter's money. Sandra's voice joined in. "Vincent says we can claim parental alienation. Play the victim card. We deserve half of whatever Walter left behind." "More than half," Derek replied. "We're the real family. The blood family." Judge Roberts, a silver-haired veteran of family court, listened to the recordings with visible disgust. When the audio finished, he addressed Caruso directly. "Mr. Caruso, are you prepared to continue representing clients who are apparently under federal investigation for drug trafficking and fraud?" Caruso's confident demeanor had evaporated overnight. He stood at his table, looking disheveled and nervous. "Your Honor, I was unaware of my client's alleged criminal activities. I request permission to withdraw from this case." Derek and Sandra sat at the plaintiff's table looking like trapped animals. Derek's hands shook so violently, he couldn't hold his water glass steady. Sandra stared at the table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Permission granted," Judge Roberts said. "Mr. and Ms. Morrison, you have the right to seek new counsel, though I should inform you that the DEA has requested you remain available for questioning." As court officers moved to escort Derek and Sandra away, Derek turned to look at me one last time. His watery blue eyes held something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. "Blaze," he called out, his voice barely audible over the courtroom noise. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm sorry for everything." Sandra said nothing as they led her away, but she glanced back with an expression of such profound loss that I almost felt pity for her. With the criminal evidence presented and the plaintiffs no longer represented, Judge Roberts dismissed the lawsuit entirely. He also ordered Derek and Sandra to pay all court costs and legal fees, though Rebecca warned me that collecting from federal prisoners would be unlikely. But the real healing began that afternoon, when Judge Harrison and I met at Walter's house to go through his personal belongings together. She'd brought the box of unopened letters, 20 years' worth of birthday wishes, and family updates that she'd been too proud to read. "He wrote about you constantly," she said as we sat in Walter's kitchen, reading through the letters chronologically. "Every achievement, every milestone. He was so proud when you graduated high school, then college. Listen to this one from your wedding announcement. Patricia, I wish you could meet Emma. She's perfect for Blaze, and watching them together reminds me that love really can heal old wounds." Tears streamed down her face as she read. "He never stopped hoping I'd forgive him. And I never stopped hoping he'd apologize first. We're both too stubborn for our own good." "What were you fighting about?" I asked gently. "Money, inheritance, property division after my mother died. Stupid stuff that seemed so important at the time." She laughed bitterly. "I was angry that he remarried so quickly. I felt like he was replacing Mom and forgetting about our family. I said terrible things I can never take back." "Walter never mentioned the fight to me. He just said you were busy with your career." "That's exactly what he would say. Never spoke ill of anyone, even when they deserved it." She folded one of the letters carefully and held it against her chest. "I wasted 20 years being angry at one of the best men I've ever known." Over the following weeks, Patricia and I developed the relationship Walter had always hoped we'd have. She shared stories about his younger days, his time in the Army, his deep love for my grandmother. I learned that Walter's workshop had been his refuge during difficult times, just as it had been mine. "He built that workbench when I was 6 years old," Patricia told me during one of our visits. "He used to let me hand him tools while he worked on projects. He said little hands were better for reaching tight spaces. 3 months after the trial, Derek surprised everyone by pleading guilty to federal drug trafficking charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. His lawyer arranged for him to write me a letter from federal prison in Michigan. The letter was written in shaky handwriting on prison stationery, but the words seemed genuine in a way Derek's courtroom testimony hadn't. Blaze. I know I don't have the right to ask for forgiveness, but I need you to know that leaving you with Walter wasn't completely selfish. Part of me knew I was too sick to be a good father. The drugs had already taken over my life, and Sandra's too. Walter was strong enough to save you from the mess we'd become. I'm clean now for the first time in 25 years. Prison rehab isn't ideal, but it's working. I think about you every day, about the man you became despite having Derek Morrison for a father. Walter did something I couldn't do. He turned you into someone worth being proud of. I don't expect you to write back or visit or anything like that. I just wanted you to know that abandoning you was the worst thing I ever did, but leaving you with Walter might have been the best. He gave you the life I never could have provided. The letter moved me in ways I hadn't expected. For 20 years, I'd carried anger toward Derek and Sandra for choosing addiction over their child. Learning that Derek at least understood the magnitude of what they'd lost helped me begin to let go of that resentment. Sandra disappeared after her release from federal prison. Her lawyer said she'd entered a residential treatment program somewhere in California, but she never contacted me directly. Sometimes I wonder if she found peace, or if the drugs finally claimed what was left of the woman who used to read me bedtime stories. 6 months after the trial, Emma and I were married in Walter's backyard, surrounded by the garden he'd spent decades cultivating. Patricia walked me down the aisle, carrying a photo of Walter, so he could be part of the ceremony. Emma wore her grandmother's dress, and I wore the watch Walter had given me for college graduation. Our wedding was small, but perfect. Emma's family, Patricia and her husband Rebecca, and her kids, a few friends from work. As we exchanged vows under the oak tree Walter had planted when I was 10 years old, I felt his presence blessing our new beginning. Emma and I decided to keep Walter's house as our primary residence. The workshop became my home office, where I design renewable energy systems and dream up projects Walter would have appreciated. Every morning, I make coffee in his kitchen and remember the lessons he taught me about building things that last. A year after the trial, I used a portion of my inheritance to establish the Walter Thompson Foundation for At-Risk Youth. The foundation provides support, mentoring, and educational opportunities for children who've been abandoned or neglected by their parents. Patricia serves on the board of directors, and we've helped over 100 kids find stable placements with loving guardians. The foundation's headquarters is located in Walter's old neighborhood, in a building we renovated, using his construction principles: solid foundation, quality materials, attention to detail. We kept his workshop intact as a memorial space, where young people can learn woodworking and other practical skills. Derek wrote me one more time from prison 2 years after the trial. His handwriting was steadier, and he'd earned his GED while incarcerated. He told me about the substance abuse program he was facilitating for other inmates and his plans to work with addiction recovery programs after his release. "I know I'll never be your father," he wrote. "Walter earned that title through 20 years of showing up when I couldn't. But maybe someday, if you're willing, I could be something else. Maybe we could be friends who happen to share DNA." I thought about his letter for weeks before responding. Finally, I wrote back with a simple message: "I'm willing to try if you stay clean." Walter taught me that everyone deserves a second chance if they're willing to earn it. 3 years later, Derek was released and moved to a halfway house in Detroit. We've exchanged a few letters and had one awkward phone conversation, but we're taking things slowly. Recovery is a long process, and trust takes time to rebuild. But Walter's influence guides me here too. He taught me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it does mean being open to growth and change. Emma and I had our first child last year, a daughter we named Grace Patricia Thompson. Patricia cried when we told her about the name, and she's become the most devoted grandmother imaginable. Watching her hold Grace in the same kitchen, where Walter once fed me breakfast, reminds me that family connections can be restored with patience and love. Every Sunday, our little family has dinner at Walter's table, continuing the tradition he started when I was 8 years old. We tell stories about our week plan projects for the house, and remember the man who taught us that love isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, commitment, and showing up even when it's difficult. Sometimes I catch myself talking to Walter while I'm working in his shop. I tell him about Grace's first smile, about the Foundation's latest success story, about the life Emma and I are building on the foundation he provided. I like to think he's proud of the man I became and the family I'm creating. The $5 million he left me was generous beyond measure, but it wasn't his most valuable gift. His real legacy was teaching me that sometimes the people who matter most aren't the ones you're born to, but the ones who choose to love you anyway. He showed me that building a life is like building a house. You start with a solid foundation, use quality materials, and never rush the important parts. Walter Thompson saved my life by refusing to let my parents' failures define my future. Now, I try to do the same thing for other children who need someone to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property. It's the knowledge that you matter, that someone believes in your potential, and that love can transform even the most broken beginnings into something beautiful. That's the lesson Walter taught me, and it's the legacy I'm determined to pass forward to Grace and every child who walks through our foundation doors. Some families are born. Others are built with patience, love, and the daily choice to show up for each other. Walter built our family one morning breakfast, one workshop lesson, and one bedtime story at a time. And now, it's my turn to keep building. Have you ever experienced someone in your life who chose to love you when your biological family couldn't or wouldn't? Someone who stepped up and became the parent figure you needed during your most vulnerable moments. I'd love to hear your stories about the people who saved you, who believed in you when you couldn't believe in yourself, and who showed you that family is about love and choice, rather than just blood and obligation. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video if Walter's story touched your heart the way it continues to touch mine. Thank you for letting me share this deeply personal journey with you. I hope Walter's legacy inspires you to be that person for someone else who needs to know they matter. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most important family relationships are the ones we build rather than the ones we're born into. Take care, and may you find the love and belonging that every person deserves.